Universal has just revealed two brand new teaser images for Jurassic World Dominion, the sixth film in the Jurassic Park franchise that is set to bring back Alan Grant, Ellie Sattler, and Ian Malcolm on an adventure alongside Owen Grady and Claire Dearing in what is being described as the conclusion to the Jurassic World trilogy. Both of these images came with a giant amount of information on what fans can expect to see when the footage drops ahead of Fast and Furious 9 later this month. And today, we're going to be going over all of it. This is everything you need to know about the Jurassic World Dominion sneak peek from Colin Trevorrow, Universal Studios, and the marketing campaign as a whole. So yesterday, this poster for Dominion was unveiled with the following description. It all started here. Experience a special extended preview of Jurassic World Dominion with F9 only in IMAX theaters, which was something I told you guys ahead of time that I thought they may end up doing, since Trevorrow said that the campaign had everything to do with getting people back into the theater. Now, when it comes to the image itself, here we can see a prehistoric mosquito feasting upon a dinosaur's body in what is obviously a parallel to the original Jurassic Park plot, wherein Dr. Henry Wu and John Hammond were able to use this tiny insect as a vessel for extracting DNA in the original book and movie. This is actually very important for the preview and information moving forward. Spoilers ahead, because it turns out we're actually going to get to see the origin story of the original T.rex in this movie. Jurassic World Dominion opens up 65 million years in the past before jumping ahead to the present day. And speaking on the late Cretaceous opening, Colin Trevorrow had this to say about the movie. It was always part of the story. I really wanted to not just tell an origin story for the T-Rex that we love, but to really put into visual terms this story that we've been told for 30 years about how dinosaurs were made from DNA fossilized in amber. Sometimes we put a human face on things. I wanted to put a dinosaur's face on things and see what actually went down. And now, canonically, we know that the dinosaur that we love, the T-Rex, was brutally murdered by the Giganotosaurus, and that's part of the story we're telling for the film. Further elaborating on the fight at hand, Screen Rant has actually published an article that breaks down the battle at the beginning of the movie, in which the prehistoric version of the Tyrannosaurus Rex loses its battle with the Giganotosaurus. And much like what happened in Jurassic Park 3, its neck was overtaken by the animal and broken before the dinosaur's pupil dilates and its life slips away. Now, what happens after that is the really big reveal, which happens to be the mosquito landing on the carcass of the Rex to suck out the dinosaur's blood. This scene is later flashed forward 65 million years into the future, where the original 1993 T-Rex, a clone from this dead Cretaceous animal, is on the run from people who are trying to hunt it down ever since it got away at the end of Fallen Kingdom. But before we talk about all of that, we need to talk about the other dinosaurs included in the preview, because there are a lot of them. So along with the fight, the late Cretaceous throwback scene shows us a look at the landscape that once existed many years ago, with absolutely no humans at all and just dinosaurs. These animals include the following: Quetzalcoatlus, Dreadnoughtus, Oviraptor, Iguanodon, Morus intrepidus, the aforementioned Giganotosaurus and T-Rex, as well as Nasutoceratops, a dinosaur we first saw in 2019's Jurassic World short, Battle at Big Rock. Now, Colin had this to say about all the other species that we can expect to see in the opening. Well, we start with the Dreadnoughtus, which was discovered not long ago, those bones. And it's one of the great things about being able to rip dinosaurs from the headlines, that we're able to see something exciting and do some research on it, and then build a model and put it in the movies. The Quetzalcoatlus, which we've never seen before, which is much bigger than a pteranodon. We're following this massive Quetzalcoatlus, and then it lands and you see all these pteranodons at its feet like birds, and you realize how big the thing is. And then we have our first feathered dinosaur, the Oviraptor. I feel like that's going to be a bit of a headline for those who care about paleontological accuracy. Another one with feathers, which is the one in the picture, is the Morus intrepidus. That one showed up maybe 2 years ago. It probably popped up into your feed that people found a tiny T-Rex-like feathered dinosaur. And that was one of the quickest turnarounds that we've had, from discovery to putting it on screen. Screen Rant later went on to describe the scenes with these dinosaurs as being rather naturalistic in tone, such as an oviraptor breaking open an egg and eating the contents inside, and the Quetzalcoatlus flying about overhead. The Morus intrepidus being this small feathered tyrannosaurid dinosaur in the image, which Colin Trevorrow has stated is actually also in the movie standing next to a Giganotosaurus from the Cretaceous period as well. When asked about the sequence from the late Cretaceous period and how much was shot on location, the director revealed the following about Dominion. It's all location. We managed to get footage from the island of Socotra, which is in the Indian Ocean and has not been filmed much at all, and then put our dinosaurs into it, and I loved that the environment has plants and trees and flowers unlike anywhere else in the world. I've been fascinated with it for a long time. The idea that we're able to put the oldest creatures known into a place that feels like the oldest part of the planet was fascinating to me. It was actually ready to go last summer. That whole sequence had been storyboarded out by Glenn McIntosh, who played Blue in the first movie, and has been our animator throughout. Glenn moved on from ILM, but we really wanted him to be involved, so we designed this sequence together. He's probably the biggest dinosaur nerd in the world. He won't mind if I call him that. He loves them so much, and he got the opportunity that I think all dinosaur fans would want to recreate what life would be like in the Cretaceous, and he really went for it. Now, after this late Cretaceous scene ends, the preview is meant to jump ahead to the present day, where that dead Tyrannosaurus clone's successor, the original T-Rex from the first Jurassic Park, is presently on the run from people trying to subdue it. This scene leads into a massive attack on a drive-in movie theater where unsuspecting locals are soon terrorized by the Jurassic Park T-Rex during a double-billed screening of American Graffiti and Flash Gordon, part of which is a shout-out to Bryce Dallas Howard's father and George Lucas himself. Now, Colin Trevorrow also revealed that originally the idea was to have the Tyrannosaur attack an actual inside movie theater, but unlike the original JP movie where Spielberg famously just explained away how the Rex got into the visitor center as being from the top of the frame, Trevorrow knew that his film wouldn't be given the same privileges, so the idea was changed to make it a drive-in and thus more believable from the angle of realism's sake. Now, apart from all of this information on what we can expect to see from the Jurassic World Dominion opening, Colin Trevorrow was also asked about all of those Fast and Furious crossover articles that have been popping up everywhere, and he had this to say about that subject matter. I don't want to say anything because then the memes will stop. Reality is just not as much fun. I mean, have I ever heard anything about a franchise crossover? Of course not, but do I enjoy seeing people take it really seriously on Twitter? I do, so let's just keep having fun with the what ifs. Which, hey, I actually think is really funny of the guy to say because honestly, it's so ridiculously true. Now, as far as what I think about this opening and all, I actually have to say that I'm very surprised to hear how this will all go down because I had actually heard about some of this stuff before in the past, however in a very different light. And when it comes to this opening Cretaceous era stuff, this was actually the only thing I'd heard about the movie that sounded kind of iffy to me. I've heard a lot about Dominion, guys. Although now that I've seen the images of it and heard what they plan to do, I also admit that I'm extremely intrigued. You see, the main reason I was actually skeptical on how this whole T-Rex versus Giga opening would work was due to the fact that paleontologically speaking, and I have to say this because you know someone is going to bring it up, the Tyrannosaurus and Giganotosaurus didn't live alongside one another 65 million years ago. But the reason I was hesitant to actually single that out as being something truly worthy of criticism was the fact that canonically speaking in the original Jurassic Park movie, Alan Grant digs up a velociraptor in Montana. Now, originally that raptor was meant to be Velociraptor anteropus, or Deinonychus, as you've no doubt heard me call it over and over again since this is what Michael Crichton wrote in the book, it's what he wrote in the first draft of the screenplay, and it's even what the concept artists like Crash McCreery drew up during pre-production. But ever since Trespasser in 1998, the people at Universal have tried to backtrack and call the dinosaur Velociraptor mongoliensis, which is native to Mongolia, obviously. That's China and not Montana. And in Fallen Kingdom, they were finally able to, quote, correct Jurassic Park's mistake, even though it wasn't really a mistake at all, and instead made the raptors in the movies out to be something else. So yeah, there's a whole big story to go along with that, and I think it makes the whole Rex and Giga coexistence in Dominion a little easier to understand, but that was literally the only thing I had heard that had made me somewhat skeptical about how people would think about this whole opening. The actual feathers is stuff that I think is really interesting to actually see physically represented in a Jurassic Park movie, because it's something that was talked about ever since the original movie as far as their relationships with birds in 1993, but we haven't seen it really until now. All in all, the decision to kill off the prehistoric version of the T.rex and have its clone successor running about the wilds of the modern world is a bold one, and it's something that I'm sure will actually arc and play out better in Dominion than the Rex death did in JP3 20 years ago. And if I had to make a prediction this far out, I'd say the modern version of the Giganotosaurus is in for a rude awakening when it goes up against the king of the dinosaurs again in round 2 or whatever. If that happens later on in the final film anyways, I don't know. Judging by how these new images look and just the scope of what we can expect to see in Dominion, I am beyond excited for what's in store. Speaking of which, Colin Trevorrow had this to say about the film overall. I'm just really into the story. This is a very different kind of Jurassic movie. There's a lot of action and a lot of adventure, but the way we bring these characters together and the effect they have on each other and how their stories collide, a movie where they're drawing closer and closer together, is just very exciting for me. Structurally, it's cool, it's different, and it's just very satisfying to see all of them up on screen together. So with the return of Alan Grant, Ellie Sattler, and Ian Malcolm being big and serious for characters like Owen Grady and Claire Dearing, Jurassic World Dominion has a lot of stuff to explore over the course of its gigantic story. Personally, the level of excitement that I've seen for this movie is kind of insane, and I think it's pretty impressive for a franchise like Jurassic to still have this level of interest, even after an entry like Fallen Kingdom came out to some reception that was mixed, or, to put it mildly, similar to something like the Lost World Jurassic Park or Jurassic Park 3, which, as all of you know, were not received anywhere near as popularly as Jurassic Park, or Jurassic World for that matter. And I said this back when the movie came out, and I'll say it again, but I always felt like the second chapter in the World trilogy, Fallen Kingdom, got kind of an unfair rap. And I say this mainly in relation to how some of the criticisms were represented as being something you absolutely could not challenge, and they were always objectively true with no ifs, ands, or buts about their merit. And while I don't think Fallen Kingdom to be a perfect movie, or really any Jurassic Park movie to be a perfect movie, I just think the meritocracy of the film was never truly given its due in court. And I can remember one very long-winded critique about the movie that I think I saw on Twitter, which Colin Trevorrow even acknowledges here is funny to see people take so seriously, but the complaint went something like, the entire scene in which the Velociraptor Blue is tranquilized is objectively bad because Owen Grady attacked the dinosaur hunters for seemingly no reason, since catching the raptor was what they were always there to do, and that the hunter, Ken Wheatley, was justified in shooting Owen because he had no reason to attack him at all, and that the movie was stupid because it didn't explain how he was able to survive being shot with a tranquilizer dart. And look, I know that I'm a fan, and that there's obviously a bit of bias here. I totally understand that, but when you actually say that this is objective criticism that cannot be challenged, that just goes against what objectivity is supposed to be. Like, the reason I never agreed with these sort of critiques was due to the fact that they just never really had any evidence to really support their arguments once you actually paid attention to what was happening on screen. Like, the reason and motivation for the Owen Grady character to attack Ken Wheatley was because he told him twice before this encounter that the man was supposed to wait for his signal, and he just did not do that, so everything actually wasn't going as planned, and because he didn't wait for the signal, now one of their men is dead, and the dinosaur he came all the way out here to rescue, his whole character motivation for coming back to the island, that might actually die too, which is what leads to the man charging Ken Wheatley. And even then, the tranq dart critique is even addressed in the film with a shot that J.A. Bayona specifically made where he shows the Zia Rodriguez character taking the tranq dart out of Owen Grady before all of it goes into his system. It's like, gee, I wonder why they set that shot up and edited it into the movie if it's not meant to explain how the character doesn't die. And there was a lot of stuff like that in Fallen Kingdom that people had conversations about over and over again, and I went through talks with paleontologists about stuff like the blood transfusion scene and how it would go down in actual scientific practices in the real world, but none of that reality ever really softened the people claiming it was all objectively bad and that you could do nothing to save it, which, call me crazy, but I actually think that's even more biased than a superfan standpoint like myself. All in all, I think the movie obviously wasn't the greatest sequel ever made, and it had some issues, just like The Lost World, which is my favorite movie in the franchise. Probably the biggest for me from Fallen Kingdom was the logistics surrounding how the Lockwood lab works, with all those people living in the basement for years and Benjamin seeming to be oblivious to the situation. But other stuff like why they didn't take the dinosaurs to Isla Sorna, that was all addressed in the movie from multiple different parties, and it just got to the point where the word objectivity was really not used correctly and instead used to try and tell people they couldn't argue against anything, which is, ironically, it's the opposite of what objective thinking is supposed to be. Now, the reason I've brought all of that up is because I want to make a point that I think it's actually kind of wild to see that even after entries like The Lost World, with its raptor gymnastics and Santiago sequence being all comedy, and JP3 with its talking dream raptors and other stuff, that this franchise has endured and been celebrated and even championed this far along despite all of that stuff seemingly weighing it down. And I think there's something to really be said about that, and particularly for Dominion, which is a big franchise movie that's set to bring back Alan Grant, Ellie Sattler, and Ian Malcolm, all legacy characters to similar stature of Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, and Princess Leia, who a lot of people, myself included, had a lot of issues with in the Star Wars sequels as far as how they were represented and taken care of. And Colin Trevorrow was also a big name in that franchise as well, since after The Rise of Skywalker kind of performed and was received wasn't as good as I think the studio hoped it would be. It was a big shock when his Duel of the Fates script leaked and got reviewed and pretty much applauded by fans all over the place after the fact. And I can only speak for myself here, but I think Colin Trevorrow understood how to handle ending a trilogy story way better than what they went with in episode 9. And I know a lot of people agree with me on that, but just the way that filmmaker is able to take elements of canon and weave it back into the modern chapters in a legitimate way is excellent in my opinion. And after reading that script, I knew personally I would have much rather have had his version of episode 9 than the one we got. And so with Jurassic World Dominion actually going back to the beginning of the Tyrannosaurus Rex from 1993's origins, and how this will later prove to be of serious consequence in Dominion as far as the legacy of genetic engineering goes, I think all of that stuff is really interesting, particularly with characters like Ian Malcolm, who was warning about this sort of stuff all the way back in the original movie. And then of course you've got Alan Grant, who now has to look at this fascination with raptors in a totally different light once he meets Owen Grady, who has not only seen them in fossilized bone representations, but also imprinted on living creatures and raised them from birth. So that's all intricate character stuff that I think people are going to love to see explored in the movie, and just see how it all plays out as far as being important to the canon of the film series in general. There's so many different directions they could go in and places for them to take the story, and with the return of Lewis Dodson, Biosyn, you know, these villains from the first film that never got followed up on, and even B.D. Wong teasing his character of Dr. Henry Wu's demise to be something of a similar comeuppance as to what Michael Crichton wrote down in the original book. I'm beyond stoked to see this movie, and I think I'm not the only one. All in all, apart from the dinosaurs not existing where they're supposed to in the geological locations from the Cretaceous period, this sounds exciting. It alludes to the wider lore and franchise as a whole, and it brings everything back around. That tagline from the original movie, an adventure 65 million years in the making, it looks like they're making it come true. So anyways, guys, these are all just my own thoughts on the subject matter and what I personally think about the news that has come out so far. But hey, whatever your own thoughts happen to be, any of it, I'd love to hear all of them in the comments down below. Now before I go, I'd like to thank all of my game wardens, as well as all of my InGen executives. I'd also like to thank all of my parkers and InGen hunters as well. Guys, it seriously means the world to me that you all continue to support what I do, and I never want you to ever forget that. Now, I'd like to thank you all for watching today's video and hope you all enjoyed the content. If you feel like I deserve it, I'd appreciate the like and hope that you'll consider subscribing if you're interested in seeing me again. See you all in the next video, guys, and as always, take it easy.